And again, I want to thank the City Club for hosting me today and the invitation, and for all of you that came here this morning to take part in this discussion. I know this is the beginning of another long day for you, trying to make heads or tails, trying to make decisions without knowing what the next week or maybe what the next day will bring. Working at my dad's bar in Cincinnati, I mopped floors, I did dishes, waited tables. I watched him and other folks in our neighborhood agonize over the same kind of decisions. I had to make them myself when I was running a small business in Westchester, back before I got involved in the political process. When I travel around our state, I talk to employers who are not only trying to create jobs, but are trying to keep the people they have on the payroll. And the powers that be in Washington don't stop to think of how, for a small business, employees are like members of a family. You watch them start a family. You lend an ear when they're trying to find a house in a good neighborhood with good schools. You run over to the hospital when someone's sick. And these are bonds that can't be measured from spreadsheets coming from this bureaucracy or this bureaucrat. But as intangible as these bonds are, they've been frayed by a struggling economy. Right now, America's employers are afraid to invest in an economy that's stalled by stimulus spending and hamstrung by uncertainty. And the prospect of higher taxes, stricter rules, more regulations has employers sitting on their hands. And after the pummeling they've taken from Washington over the last 18 months, who can blame them? And while visiting our state last week, President Obama attended a political fundraiser in Columbus, and at the same exact moment, just a couple of blocks away, hundreds of Ohioans were waiting in line at a job fair where they would learn once again the companies aren't hiring right now. They're frozen. Or as the organizer of the job fair put it, employers are, and I'm quoting now, scared to death. Yes, that is what's happening in America. Employers are scared to death. And when I met with the president last month at the White House, I conveyed my belief, as shared by many economists, that this ongoing uncertainty is hurting small businesses and preventing the creation of jobs. And not long after we spoke, he signed a $26 billion stimulus spending bill that funnels money to states in order to protect government jobs. And even worse, it's funded by a new tax that makes it more expensive to create jobs here in the United States and less expensive to create jobs overseas. Listen, this cannot continue. You know, I've had enough, and I think the American people have had enough of politicians in Washington talking about wanting to create jobs as a ploy to get themselves reelected while doing everything possible to prevent jobs from being created here in our country. Today, I'm going to propose 5 actions that President Obama should take immediately to break this economic uncertainty and help more Americans find an honest day's work. First, the president should announce that he will not carry out his plan to impose job-killing tax hikes on families and small businesses. Unless Congress acts, virtually every American will see their taxes go up on January the 1st. President Obama stated he wants to stop some tax hikes and not others, once again putting government in the position of picking winners and losers and pitting taxpayer against taxpayer. According to an analysis by the nonpartisan Joint Congressional or Joint Tax Committee, that's the official scorekeeper for all tax policy in our country, half of small business income in America, that's half, would face higher taxes under the president's plan. Of course, as if on cue, the same Washington politicians who've spent the last 18 months borrowing and spending our economy into the ground are now fretting whether we can afford the cost of stopping these job-killing tax hikes. Only in Washington would it be acceptable to think that taxpayers should have to pay for the privilege of keeping more of their hard-earned money. We will not solve our fiscal challenges until we cut spending and have real economic growth, and we won't have real economic growth if we keep raising taxes on small businesses. One of Obama's predecessors once said, and I'll quote, "An economy constrained by high tax rates will never produce enough revenue to balance the budget, just as it will never create enough jobs." That president was John F. Kennedy. So let me be clear. Raising taxes on families and small businesses during a recession is a recipe for disaster for both our economy and for our deficit. Period. End of story. That's why President Obama should work with Republicans to stop all of these job-killing tax hikes, and we should do it quickly. Second, President Obama should announce that he will veto any job-killing bill sent to his desk by a lame duck Congress, including card check, national energy tax, and any other tax increases on families and small businesses. The House passed a cap-and-trade national energy tax, but that bill remains sitting in the United States Senate. Remember this. This plan to raise energy prices in America will, as President Obama said, raise our utility cost. I think he said they will skyrocket. Now listen, the national energy tax has the capacity to wipe out many of the manufacturers and family farms here in Ohio that are just barely hanging on. Also pending is a card check bill. And this bill is the top priority for the public sector unions that provide money and foot soldiers for Democrat campaigns around the country. It eliminates a worker's right to a secret ballot union elections, making it easier to organize while putting employers at a firm disadvantage. Card check is essentially a how-to guide for destroying small business jobs. When I asked the president about his support for card check during a meeting last month, he accused me of scare tactics, while the rest of the Democrat leaders sitting around the table looked at me as if they didn't know what I was talking about. Well, the very next week, the president told a union crowd that he will, quote, keep on fighting for card check. Now, Democrat leaders refused to rule out the possibility of forcing these job-killing bills through a lame duck session after the election, after the voters have had their say. Their failure to level with the American people only compounds the ongoing economic uncertainty that we see in our country. President Obama should announce that he would veto these job-killing bills, and I pledge that Republicans will work with him to sustain those vetoes. Third, the president should call on Democrat leaders in Congress to stop obstructing Republican attempts to repeal the new health care law's job-killing 1099 mandate. The president's government takeover of health care is already wreaking havoc on employers. This is a law that, upon its enactment, triggered the creation of more than 160 boards, bureaucracies, programs, and commissions. And by the end of July, Washington had already racked up nearly 3,833 pages of regulations to direct the law's implementation. One of the most controversial mandates here requires small businesses to report any total purchase that would run more than $600. So if a landscaper wants to buy a new lawnmower or a restaurant needs a new ice maker, they have to report that purchase to the federal government. If you're a mom and pop grocery store and you buy, let's say, $1,000 worth of groceries from 15 different vendors, you've got to file 15 different forms. What's the point of making employers and entrepreneurs spend $17 billion to comply with this law, to send paperwork to Washington, where it's going to cost another $10 billion to file it away? You want to talk about overhead? Last month, Republicans attempted to force a vote on the House floor to repeal this job-killing mandate. The Democrat leaders blocked that vote and instead attempted to use this as an opportunity to impose another job-killing tax on U.S. job creators. President Obama should call on the Congress today to repeal this mandate without delay and without strings attached. Fourth, President Obama should submit to Congress for his immediate consideration an aggressive spending reduction package. When Congress returns, we should force Washington to cut non-defense discretionary spending to 2008 levels before the stimulus was put into place. This would show that Washington's ready to get serious about bringing down the deficits that threaten our economy. For his part, President Obama says we should wait and talk about a deficit reduction plan next year. I say, let's talk about it right now. All the stimulus spending has gotten us nowhere, but it comes from somewhere. We're now borrowing 41 cents of every dollar we spend from our kids and our grandkids. Think about that. 41 cents of every dollar the federal government spends this year, we're going to pass the bill on to our kids and our grandkids. This spring, when power changed hands in Britain, another country racked by red ink, one Treasury minister left a note for his successor. And the note said, "I'm afraid to tell you there's no money." Well, I'm not afraid to tell you there's no money left. We're broke. In fact, our debt is on track to exceed the entire size of our economy in the next 2 years. And the government has no plan in place for paying back this debt. In fact, Congress didn't even write a budget this year. They just canceled it altogether. Without a budget, Washington will try to get away with continuing to spend at current levels. And I don't think we can allow that to happen. Economists have warned that all this borrowing runs the risk of causing a damaging spike in interest rates, which would cripple any kind of job creation in our country. We also cannot allow politicians in Washington to continue trotting out the same tired scare tactics because they don't have the courage to say no to whichever union or special interest has their hand out. That's not governing, and that's certainly not leadership. These are just the last gasp of a failing government clinging to the discredited belief that more spending, more taxing, and more borrowing can solve all of our problems. Republicans are ready to work with President Obama to take this first step on the path to fiscal sanity. Lastly, employers and small business owners are rightly frustrated by the fact that no one in the White House, not the president, not the vice president, not his economic team, no one's listening to them. Part of the reason for this is that virtually no one in the White House has run a small business or created jobs in the private sector. And this lack of real hands-on experience shows in the policies that are coming out of this administration. The American people are asking, where are the jobs? And all the president's economic team has to offer are promises of green shoots that never seem to grow. The worse things get, the wagons get circled, and they continue to defend the indefensible. We've been told that the president's economic team is exhausted. And already, his budget director and his chief economist have moved on where they're about to. Clearly, they see the writing on the wall, and the president should too. President Obama should ask for and accept the resignations of the remaining members of his economic team, starting with Secretary Geithner and Larry Summers, the head of the National Economic Council. Now, this is no substitute for a referendum on the president's job-killing agenda. That question will be put before the American people in due time. But we do not have the luxury of waiting months for the president to pick scapegoats for his failing stimulus policies. We've tried 19 months of government as community organizer, and it hasn't worked. Our fresh start needs to begin now. Today I'd like to talk to you about how we go about achieving the fresh start that I think that we need. In May, Republicans launched the America Speaking Out Project, led by Congressman Kevin McCarthy of California, to give taxpayers, families, and small business owners a direct line to their elected representatives. Online and at town hall meetings, Americans are sharing their solutions for building a more responsible government and a better country. All you have to do is log on to americaspeakingout.com, post an idea of your own, comment on someone else's, or even vote on someone else's. And as we speak, thousands of ideas are percolating at America Speaking Out today. This listening effort will culminate next month with a release of a clear and positive agenda focused on getting people back to work again, because jobs is the issue. And where are the jobs? It's the question I hear almost everywhere I go. This agenda will reject the Washington knows best policies and offer a fresh start focused on unshackling small businesses, unleashing the entrepreneurial spirit of the American people, and helping families across this great nation realize the American dream. Now, This won't be some document handed down by the Washington powers that be, those of us that think we know it all, and the same old, same old. And it certainly won't be based on the idea that sitting in Washington, cutting backroom deals on a 2,000-page bill represents something like hope. We're building this agenda from the ground up by listening to the American people. Never before has the need for a fresh start in Washington been more pressing. I've discussed what we're up against in terms of addressing the immediate economic uncertainty. And beyond the sound bites and the headlines, Washington's gripped by a more entrenched uncertainty, a standstill bred from all the scar tissue built up between the two parties, all the kicking the can down the road, and all the interests that continue to prod us to keep doing so. I've said that if I were fortunate enough to be Speaker of the House, I would run the House differently. And I don't just mean differently than the way Democrats are running it today. I mean differently than both Democrats or Republicans in the past. That means challenging the old ways in Washington, getting to the bottom of what drives people crazy, and then trying to fix it once and for all. Look at spending. We don't need to just stop spending so much. We need to stop spending so irrationally. The common logic of Washington Democrats is that government spending creates jobs where money is used, to build a hiking trail or a playground. Yet we have to remember, even when spending is not at record-setting levels, each dollar the government takes is taken directly out of the private sector. This is a lose-lose proposition, plain and simple. And on the front end, Washington's investments in the economy aren't nearly as efficient because government spending decisions often put a premium on political expedience rather than sound economic policy. And as we're learning now, deficit spending always comes due. Here's an example how out of hand things have become. And we see this in Washington all the time when politicians take victory laps for spending billions of dollars to continue to provide unemployment insurance. Now, these benefits are held up as a jobs plan, a stimulus for the economy. Keeping workers on the unemployment rolls instead of fostering small business and private sector growth is not a responsible jobs plan. The American people would agree, and so would I, that unemployment insurance is an important safety net, but it is not a responsible jobs program. The American people know what's going on here. They know that when the bill comes due, it's their pockets that Washington's going to look to for a bailout. We're seeing it right now with the president's plan to raise taxes. Listen, we need to have an open, honest conversation with the American people about the scope of our fiscal challenges. That means everything from short-term commitments to long-term commitments. It's an act of bad faith and bad judgment to start this conversation by imposing job-killing tax hikes on families and small businesses. Failing to rein in these debts is our fault, both Democrats and Republicans, and we should not punish unemployed workers and small business owners for our inability to make the tough choices that we're elected to make. We need to start looking at every government program and ask ourselves, is it right to force our kids and grandkids to pay for this? Mitch Daniels, the governor, recently said, "You'd be really amazed at how much government you never miss." He's probably right. Just as we reevaluate how the federal government spends money, we should also rethink about how the federal government collects money. Washington's backward counting assumes tax relief expires while the spending will always continue, setting up a built-in bias for higher taxes and more spending. That is, of course, unless Congress extends the tax relief. So instead of making tough choices, Congress regularly ends up rubber stamping a haphazard collection of must-do tax policies from one year to the next. The so-called tax extenders bill is a prime example of this. This year's tax extender bill had 71 separate tax provisions in it, totaling $31.6 billion of tax relief. And more provisions get added each and every year, but few, if any, ever seem to fall out of the package. There's everything in there from the research and development tax credit, special expensing for the film industry, an extension and modification of a tax credit for the steel industry fuel. How about the mine rescue team training tax credit? Or tax incentives so you can invest in the District of Columbia. Are they worth it? Many of them are. But we just go ahead and extend all of them temporarily, usually right at the last minute, so Washington can continue to pander to the loudest voices instead of implementing the best ideas. For Washington, that's just business as usual, but it's no way to run a business, and it certainly is no way to run a government. We need to take a long, hard look at the undergrowth of deductions, credits, and special carve-outs that our tax code has become. And yes, we need to acknowledge that what Washington sometimes calls tax cuts are really poorly disguised spending programs that expand the role of government in the lives of individuals and employers. It was the late Jack Kemp who once said, not all tax cuts are created equal. We need to bring simplicity and certainty to our tax code so we can make it a vehicle for sustainable pro-growth policies, not transfer payments to the favored few. By trying to build a recovery on government stimulus spending and failing, Washington's kept the private sector in bust, while the public sector has had a boom. Since February 2009, the private sector has lost millions of jobs, while the federal government has grown by hundreds of thousands of workers. We've not just seen more government jobs, but better paying ones as well. Federal employees now make more, on average, than double what the private sector workers are paid. And what's more appalling is the fact that this gap has more than doubled in President Obama's first year in office, during a time when millions of American workers, private sector workers, either lost their jobs or took a pay cut just to keep the one that they already have. It's just nonsense to think that taxpayers are subsidizing the fattened salaries and pensions of federal bureaucrats who are out there making it harder to create private sector jobs. And as we speak, the Obama administration has in the queue 191 rules and regulations that could each have an estimated annual cost to our economy of $100 million or more, and some of them even over $1 billion. That's 191 new layers of red tape waiting in the wings, 191 de facto taxes on employers and consumers that keep people out of work and hamper innovation and investment. Small businesses can't plan for the future with ever-changing rules. And I wish I could tell you exactly what these new rules are, but there's no transparency here. Last week I sent a letter to the president asking for him to provide a full disclosure of these regulations so that we could share them with the American people. We received a response, but still no details on what all these new regulations really are. And no matter who's in charge, the federal government should not be able to issue job-threatening rules on a whim without public warning or proper scrutiny. Endless spending sprees, entangled tax structures, and bureaucracy run amok. These are all outgrowths of a tired, bloated, and broken Washington. Now more than ever, we need a fresh start that puts power back in the hands of the American people. As one citizen on America Speaking Out said, and I'll quote, "Just get out of the way." Republicans on the House Budget Committee, led by Congressman Paul Ryan, have already identified the $1.3 trillion in specific spending cuts that could be implemented immediately. These are common sense steps, like canceling the unspent stimulus funds and the TARP bailouts that put the brakes on Washington's out-of-control spending spree. Republicans have also proposed establishing strict budget caps to limit federal spending on an annual basis. If we reduce spending from current levels and impose a hard cap on future growth, we can save taxpayers more than $340 billion, and we can make sure that this is the last Washington spending spree of its kind. To restore balance between the federal government and the public sector, Republicans have called for freezing both government pay and government hiring. Instead of growing big government, let's focus on growing small businesses around our country. Last month, as part of our America Speaking Out project, Republican lawmakers met with some of America's employer community to hear their concerns and talk about ways to end this economic uncertainty. One of the ideas that was mentioned was a freeze on new job-killing regulations, just something Washington could do to give the private sector a little breathing room. Right now, Republicans are fighting for common-sense legislation offered by Congressman Jeff Davis of Kentucky that will require congressional approval of any new rule that imposes a cost of more than $100 million on our nation's economy. I think this initiative would serve as a much-needed restraining order against unelected busybodies and bureaucrats who overstep their boundaries and make it harder to create jobs. President Reagan once said that there ought to be a law against saying that there ought to be a law. I couldn't agree more. It's not enough, however, to break the current uncertainty and rein in big government and hope the pendulum swings the other way. Once businesses get up off the sidelines, we need to keep them in the game. And one idea that Ways and Means Republican, ranking Republican Dave Kemp of Michigan proposed as part of our stimulus plan was to allow small businesses with fewer than 500 employees to take a tax deduction equal to 20% of their income. This would free up extra capital and allow for new investment and new hiring, and was a better solution when we offered it last year, and frankly, it continues to be what we think is a better solution. We've also recently heard a lot of talk in Washington about the manufacturing sector, but no action. Congress is yet to act on the pending trade agreements with Colombia, Panama, and South Korea. These agreements would level the playing field for American workers, farmers, and businesses, and pave the way for creating hundreds of thousands of new jobs right here at home. Passing these free trade agreements was a critical plank in our jobs plan that House Republican Whip Eric Cantor and I presented to the President last December. Congress should approve these free trade agreements immediately. The best case I can make for these solutions is that they work, and some of them are working right now. Last year, House Republicans launched a state solutions project, bring Republican governors and legislators together to fight big government policies and promote better solutions to the everyday challenges that the American people deal with. Now let's look at what two Republican governors who've been in office only a matter of months have been able to accomplish. In Virginia, Governor Bob McDonnell entered office facing an unprecedented $4.2 billion deficit. His predecessor proposed closing the shortfall by imposing the largest tax increase in the state's history. Governor McDonnell refused to balance the state's budget by making it harder for Virginia families and business owners to balance their own budgets. In New Jersey, Governor Chris Christie entered office facing an $11 billion budget deficit left behind by his predecessor. And it was all gimmicked up by some new property tax for the homeowners in New Jersey. Both governors forged bipartisan cooperation, set priorities, cut spending, closed their shortfalls, and did so without raising taxes. But unless Washington provides leadership and puts in place policies that promote lasting private sector job growth, our engine of economic growth, the states, will continue to face difficult choices year after year. For 20 years now, I've watched leaders in both parties look at the big issues, the tough issues, and then I watch them look away. Now we're just out of time. We've run out of road to kick the bucket down. It's time to put grown-ups in charge. It's time for people willing to accept responsibility, and it's time to do what we say that we're going to do. These are the values that I learned growing up with my 11 brothers and sisters, the values that I passed on to my daughters. And I've also told my girls how I was raised, to never accept the next best thing for myself or my country. This is the time. No more uncertainty, no more muddled messages. America's strength is in her people, hardworking, industrious, always pioneering, always innovating. So we will confront these hard truths together, and we will tackle these challenges together. I want to thank you again for the opportunity of being here today, and I look forward to your questions.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we are listening to a special forum featuring House Minority Leader John Boehner, representative from Ohio's 8th Congressional District. We're going to return to our speaker momentarily, but first we have a couple of matters to remind you of, and please be formulating your questions for the time when we return. Please make them brief and to the point. We remind you that members and guests alike are welcome to submit questions today. And as Gary Musselman said at the beginning, we hope all of you who are not members will consider joining and help support the nearly 100 years of the City Club of Cleveland. This Friday, on August 27, Admiral Mike Mullen, who is chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, will address the City Club. A week from this Friday, on September 3rd, the City Club will welcome Terry Stewart, who is president and CEO of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And there are other programs coming up in the future that are listed in the programs at your table. Today we're pleased to welcome guests at tables hosted by Baker Hostetler, the Greater Cleveland Partnership, Jones Day, KeyBank, Porter Wright, and University Hospitals. And we thank all of those organizations for supporting us today. Now we'll return to our speaker for our traditional City Club period. As I said, the guests are welcome to submit questions. Holding the microphone today is Carrie Miller in the back there. And I would like to remind you that we're asking for brief questions, no speeches, please. First question.
The President has formed a 18-member commission to make proposals on cutting the deficit. The report will come out after the election. Do you have any hope that they will come out with some meaningful reforms? Or is this just a Trojan horse for raising taxes?
I don't think any of us knows what the outcome will be. I'm hopeful. After having talked with former Senator Alan Simpson, the two people who are chairing this commission, I'm hopeful that they will take a look at the long-term challenges our country faces. You know, there are 18 members of this commission. It takes 14 of them to make a recommendation. Senator McConnell, the Republican leader in the Senate, and myself worked together to put 6 serious members on the commission in the hope that they'll be able to come forward with recommendations. But I hope that there is ample time, if there are recommendations, for the American people to have a clear view of what it is that's being recommended. And they ought to be entitled to have time to read it, debate it, and discuss it before Congress begins to put it on the table. There are some on the commission that during their meetings have continued to advocate for higher taxes. And one in particular that we continue to hear out of some of the more liberal members of the commission is the idea that we ought to have a value-added tax, a national sales tax, on top of all the other taxes that we have. I can tell you that I would not support that, nor would I believe any of my Republican colleagues in the House or Senate.
Thank you for coming this morning. We appreciate your presence. I would like to know, from your point of view, where Paul Volcker fits in and whether the administration at any level is really listening to him.
I think you'd have to ask the administration. I know that they've been in touch with him. He's made some suggestions with regard to bank reform. But in terms of overall economic policy, I don't know that I've heard anything from him. And I wouldn't know whether the administration is listening to him or not.
Congressman, thank you for your service. Recently, Speaker Pelosi said she joins with others in wanting to investigate those who are opposing the Ground Zero Mosque, and I'm just curious about your comments on her statements.
I really don't understand what should be investigated. The American people are concerned about this. No one doubts the right of these people to build a mosque where they see fit. But just because they have the right to do something doesn't mean that it's the right thing for them to do. And the American people overwhelmingly believe that this is not the right thing to do.
Mr. Congressman, would you comment on the connection between our immigration policy, or what it ought to be, and the economic activity in the country?
Well, the issue of immigration obviously has been a very divisive issue for the last several years in America. A large number of illegal immigrants, undocumented workers, if you will, in our country. But I think the first thing we have to remember is this. The United States allows more than 1 million people annually to come here legally. 1 million. More than all of the other countries in the world put together. And I think that when you look at how open our arms are, it's pretty clear that we're a nation of immigrants. When you look at the overall problem, though, the American people are upset because we are unable and have been unwilling to secure our borders and enforce our laws. And I don't think the American people will allow the Congress or the government of Washington to move down the path in terms of anything that looks like comprehensive reform until they have some confidence that we are willing and have the ability to secure our borders and enforce our laws.
Welcome back to Cleveland. I'm Craig Marvany out of southwestern Cuyahoga County, Strongsville, North Royalton. Nice tie, by the way.
Well, thank you.
Across the country, as voters are sorting out who to vote for between the candidates, local, state, and federal races, they've got a choice in this tough economy of needing to build jobs and not kill jobs. Are voters better off generally considering, as a general proposition, candidates with private sector business experience who know how to build jobs, or people who come from the government, who've spent their entire careers in the government and have never held a job in the private sector?
You know, I used to play softball. Well, let me tell you a story. I was growing my business in the mid to late 70s. Along the way, while I was growing my business, I got involved in my neighborhood homeowners association. And it ended up putting me on a path that I never thought in my wildest dreams I would ever be on. You know, I'm the last guy in the world who should be standing here as a Republican leader in the House, having 11 brothers and sisters. My dad owned a bar. We didn't have much, if anything. But, you know, growing up in America, you can grow up and be anything you want to be. And you can do anything that you want to do. And America's been an opportunity machine for 200 years. We create opportunities for our citizens unlike any other country in the world. That's been the key to our success. But the bigger the government gets, the smaller the people get. The more the government takes, the less you have to invest in yourself, your family, your community, your business. I never wanted to do this, but I thought the government was choking the goose that was laying the golden egg. And I believe that what Washington needed, what Ohio needs, is people from the real world to take a more active role in their government. That's what got me into this. Sometimes I wonder. But I think, you know, I have students come up and ask me all the time, hey, I want to have a career in politics. What do you think I should do? First thing I tell them to do is go get a real job. Go out there and get some experience. Go out there and understand what's going on in your community, because what we need in Washington are people who will come there with a wealth of experience and a background to make sound judgments on behalf of their constituents.
Good morning, Representative Boehner. Thank you very much for coming to the City Club of Cleveland. You mentioned Representative Paul Ryan, and I understand he will head the House Budget Committee if the Republicans take back the House in November. He's outlined a budget plan called Roadmap for America's Future, which I understand will erase, the plan is that it would erase the federal deficit by 2063, simplify the tax code, and significantly alter Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. It only has 13 co-sponsors, Republican co-sponsors, and it's reported that that Representative Ryan has said that his GOP colleagues are too afraid to endorse a plan that they agree with. And you've indicated that the roadmap will not be part of the Republican agenda this fall, and that you have doubts about how good the policy is for parts of the plan. Can you tell us which parts of the plan you have doubts about?
Well, when you look at Paul Ryan's work, I've got to tell you, he and his colleagues on the Budget Committee have done some really, really good work in putting this plan together. But let's talk about what it is. It's not a budget. It's a 75-year plan written by a handful of members who did serious work at trying to figure out how we address the big problems facing our country. Listen, I said it earlier. It's time that we have an adult conversation with the American people about the challenges we face. We face big challenges, both in the short term and in the long term. Our job, all of us, not just 535 members of the Congress, all of us have a responsibility to leave our country in better shape than what we found it. You probably have a hard time finding an American today who believes that that's the case. That challenge is in front of us. And we're not going to solve that challenge by getting into the usual scare tactics and political nonsense that goes on. Let's have an adult conversation. I know it's not going to be easy, but the sooner we have this conversation about the problems we face, the potential solutions to those problems, and then, obviously, zeroing down on what the real solutions are, we're never going to brighten the future for our kids and theirs.
The administration, for a whole host of reasons, wants to wean the United States to a significant extent off carbon-based fuel. Every analysis shows that nuclear power produces most of the megawatts to do that. Yet the only repository for nuclear waste planned or conceived or developed in this country is Yucca Mountain in Nevada, and it is stopped dead in its tracks by Harry Reid. If the Republicans can take back Congress, what position would the party take on opening Yucca Mountain so our nuclear reactors have some place to put their waste?
Most Republicans have supported Yucca Mountain for the 20 years that I've been there. And the American people would be shocked to know how much nuclear waste is laying just miles from their home. It's laying at every nuclear plant around the country. And why? Because we can't get Yucca Mountain finished because it's not politically correct. We've invested tens of billions of dollars in a storage facility that is as safe as anything we're going to find. But even if we're not willing to store it, then why wouldn't we as a country begin to reprocess much of this nuclear waste, where you can reduce the waste by 90%? Listen, when the French can produce 82% of their electricity with nuclear power, there's no reason why the United States can't. It's just a matter of will. And during the 20 years I've been in Congress, it's not been politically correct to support nuclear energy. We're serious about bringing more resources in the energy field and reducing our dependence on foreign sources of energy. We have to do all of the above. And doing all of the above means that we ought to have renewables. Well, I'm for wind, I'm for solar. I'm also for additional oil and gas exploration that I think that we can do in an environmentally sensitive way. We also need clean coal technology, and we need nuclear power. We have to do all of the above if we're serious about growing our economy and moving ourselves off of this dependence on foreign oil. When you look at what the Chinese are doing, they're building coal-fired power plants, they're building nuclear power plants, and they're buying every energy resource they can get their hands on any place in the world. Why? Because they understand that you cannot grow an economy without energy.
Good morning, Leader Boehner. We purchase many resources from other countries, such as steel from China. Why don't we use the resources that we have in America, such as the steel that used to be manufactured in Ohio?
Well, we still produce a lot of steel in Ohio, and I can bring you down to AK Steel in my district. In fact, produce a lot of steel. Except, if this cap-and-trade proposal goes into effect, or their national energy tax, what'll happen is the steel from China will be far less expensive than the steel produced here. And that, I think, we cannot allow to happen. When you look at the amount of trade that goes on in the world, understand this. We continue to be the largest exporter of manufactured goods and services in the world. And that's why these free trade agreements with Panama, Colombia, and South Korea are critically important, because those countries have access to our market. We have the most open market in the world. What these free trade agreements will do is give us better access to their markets, thereby creating jobs here in the United States.
Thank you, Speaker Boehner, for coming today.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves here.
When Pete Corrigan defeats Dennis Kucinich in November and helps the Republicans take back the Congress, I just am curious if there's been any discussion as what we can do to push back the unelected fourth branch of government, the regulatory branch, and what specific plans, because it seems like with this administration, they have taken on new power every day, and I just wondered, if you can share as to how we can do that.
Well, a lot of this is the Congress's fault. We've reduced members to being mere voters. I remember growing up in the Ohio House, you learn pretty quickly how to be a legislator. And the members aren't legislators anymore. They're voters. They could whip out their voting card and they vote. When you look at the laws that are passed today, you'll see hundreds and hundreds of rulemakings required by some agency of the federal government. You can look at the financial services bill that was signed into law, requiring 300 or 400 new regulatory filings that have to occur. When you look at a health care bill, again, you see dozens and dozens and dozens of regulatory filings that have to happen. So when you ask your consultant that's going to advise you as to how much your health insurance is going to cost under the new plan, they can't tell you. Why? Because the rules haven't been written yet. This is where Congress needs to provide proper oversight of executive branch agencies. I think the Congress has given up far too much of its power to the executive branch. Congress needs to provide effective oversight. If Congress wants to pass a law, then we ought to pass a law. We ought to make it clear what it is we're doing and write it in law, and not leave it to unelected busybodies and bureaucrats to write a new rule for us. All these rules, all these regulations, somebody has to comply with them, but you can't comply with them until you understand what they are. So you've got to hire a consultant to find out, how does this affect my business? And then you've got to find a way to provide for record keeping, and then whatever remedial action you might actually have to take. Every rule, every regulation costs someone something. And when we look at why we're losing manufacturing jobs in America, it's because high corporate tax rates, we've got the highest, second highest in the world, and we've got more regulations on American businesses than any other country in the world, driving up the cost, making America less competitive.
Good morning, Congressman. Welcome back to Cleveland. In the financial package that was just passed, left out of that package appeared to be any regulations or controls over Fannie and Freddie, who the government has spent billions trying to bail out. How do we get a handle on that and prevent hundreds of billions of dollars more in bailout funds for those two organizations?
Well, it's one of the reasons why I had to oppose the bill, because they're going to punish every financial institution in America, to pay for the sins of a handful on Wall Street. And the three biggest problems that led to the downfall and the financial meltdown, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and subprime lending, none of the three are addressed in this bill. Now, they have to be addressed. We've pumped $150 billion into Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And God only knows how much more we'll have to go into there. Yet there's no plan to reform these two quasi-government agencies. It needs to be done.
Would you comment briefly, if it can be done, on global warming? Do you think it is a concern? And if cap and trade is not the right approach, do you have a general strategic direction you would recommend?
There's no question that over the last 100 years, there's been a change in our climate. How much man is responsible for this is still up for debate, as we've seen over the last couple of years. A lot of different debate over man's involvement. When you look at a volcanic eruption, which I've seen scientists reveal that this could be 50,000 times what man's involvement in terms of creating CO2 would be, you begin to scratch your head and wonder, wait a minute, what is this? But before we jump off the deep end of imposing a national energy tax that'll cost us millions of American jobs every single year, we ought to have real evidence about what the facts are. But I would also add this. If you want a serious attempt at cleaning up the air, I don't want to breathe dirty air, and I don't want my kids or grandkids to do it. Here's what we should do. We should do all of the above. Because if we did all of the above, have more energy, we would have cheaper energy, and frankly, we would have cleaner air. This is a common sense step toward addressing the issues of climate change and CO2 in a way that would benefit all Americans.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we have been listening to the Honorable John Boehner, Minority Leader in the U.S. Congress. Thank you very much, Representative Boehner. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned. Great job.